Welcome to the Outlaws Podcast, part 2 of the preview show. I've got Nick joining me on the phone right now. Nick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I spent most of my day painting a room, which isn't very fun. So sorry we're getting at this a little bit later. So
Man, that's not fun at all.
no, it's not. So when your family get back?
They get back tomorrow night.
All right. So you got what 24 more hours of living in privacy again?
I think so. I did some cleaning this morning that I think will meet my wife's expectations. Then the rest of the day was PlayStation 3, buddy.
PlayStation 3, nice. What games do you play?
Right now, I actually went back and I'm doing Uncharted 2. Okay. I played Uncharted 3 and I was like, well, I should probably play the second one too. So I'm playing that right now.
Okay, cool. Well, I figured we'd go with the AL Central to start off the show off. Let's start off with the Tigers. Obviously, they're probably one of the favorites to make the World Series this year. And their big move in the offseason is that they traded for Prince Fielder and they acquired Ian Kinsler to play second base. Do you think that was a good move for them, or do you like that move for Kinsler?
I don't particularly like the move for Kinsler. I do like the move for Detroit. I think Detroit's probably, of any team in any division, has to be the heaviest favorite to win their division when you look at the rest of the teams in the Central. But I get why they had to make the move. They had to clear up cap space. I don't think that Fielder was producing to the size of the contract he signed. And Kinsler does give him a good, solid top-of-the-order guy, which I think they need as long as he can stay healthy. And I think they've got enough punch in the rest of their lineup where they won't miss Fielder that much.
Yeah, I think you pretty much said it. I pretty much echoed my thoughts on that. Kinsler, I don't expect his numbers to be as good as they've been moving to a bigger ballpark, but the lineup is just as good. And I think he's probably going to be hitting atop that lineup. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with Austin Jackson, how high he's going to hit, or if they move him down the order. He's obviously a guy that's kind of been up and down throughout his career, but when he's on, he can definitely score a lot of runs and hit for a high average. So is he a guy that you're at all interested in? I know he's going to be drafted, but for some reason, I've just never really been that interested in taking Austin Jackson.
No, he's one of those guys that I never think about on draft day. And then at some point in the season, I always seem like I wish I owned him because he'll go through these spurts where he just catches fire. The website I'm looking at has him projected to hit fifth. I don't know how that works for the way he plays his game.
Yeah.
I think he might be the number 2 hitter, but no doubt about it. He does rack up the hits. He can get on base. He can score a lot of runs. But I think that production might drop off a bit hitting behind Cabrera instead of in front of him.
Yeah, I think that's a little interesting. For me, it seems like Kinsler would project better at a number 5 hitter with Jackson hitting leadoff, just a little bit more power to his game. But I know that they both have been leadoff hitters the last few years. A guy that's been a little bit under the radar, he's actually first base eligible in our league, but he lost his catcher eligibility, is Victor Martinez. Obviously, he doesn't have a lot of power, but he can probably score. He can probably drive in his fair share of runs and hit for a high average like he always does. Once again, a guy on a good team that I'm probably, for some reason, really not that interested in. Maybe it's just his eligibility only being at first base. Any chance that you would take Victor Martinez for $2 or $3 at the end of the draft?
Well, I've got a crazy stat for you, and it's probably the only stat I'm going to drop tonight. It's the only one I really see off the top of my head. After the All-Star break last year, Victor Martinez had the highest batting average in the American League.
Wow, is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, there's one for you. But he went through about a year and a half of injury, and I think over time when players are hurt that long, we forget how good of a player they really are. But he is really good. I don't know if you'd be the kind of person you would slot in as your everyday first baseman, but I think that he wouldn't be a bad utility grab. Because even if he was catcher eligible, I still think there's probably 8-9 catchers that you would rather have ahead of him. But I think in a utility role, I think he'd be okay.
That's interesting. I didn't realize he had that hot of a second half.
He was hitting the cover off the ball.
I don't know what they're going to do, if there's any chance at all that they're going to play him as catcher in some of the interleague games. But that might be something to watch just to see if he does get any playing time there. If for some reason he was not owned, he'd be a big pickup, I think, assuming that he would be able to get those 5 games and be eligible at catcher.
Let me ask you about one offensive player just to get your thoughts.
Sure.
There's been been a little bit of buzz around their rookie third baseman, Nick Castellanos. And so far, he seems to be off to somewhat of a decent spring. I think he's hitting about 280, 285. And the Tigers are very excited about that. But doesn't seem to be a slow process for him to catch on offensively. What do you think about him? What have you heard about him?
Honestly, this is a guy that I don't have as much knowledge about. I know that he's a big prospect and that they pretty much have opened up a spot for him at third base with trading Fielder and moving Cabrera back to first. For me, I don't think he's going to be on my radar for draft day, but he'll be a guy that's on my watch list. I'm going to see how he does early on in the season. Honestly, I haven't looked at his minor league stats to see what areas he excels in. If he's a big average guy, a big power guy, I really don't have a whole lot to add, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what to make of him. I just know he's been off to a really nice spring, and that third base job is his no matter what. So I do find that to be pretty interesting. That just to give you an idea, as far as the 2012, seems like he's about just looking at this in the minor leagues, he's about a 10. I don't know, about a 10 home run a year guy, but looks like he hits for a real nice average. Doesn't strike out a whole lot.
Yeah, and you got to take into, I don't know how old he is or if you can see it in front of you on his profile, but a lot of times these minor league players, they don't hit as many home runs in the minors because they're still developing their power. So even though they're moving into higher levels of baseball with more competition, you'll often see more home runs in the major leagues than what they hit in the minors with some players.
Yeah, and unfortunately he's going to play in Detroit. Yeah. So that will even zap some more of his power in what little he seems to have so far. So it may take a while to develop. Doesn't look like the kind of guy you're going to take for his power numbers, but it looks like he hits the ball pretty well.
Yeah, Detroit's got a monster field. I think their center field goes to like 420. Just got to be one of the deepest in baseball. Let me ask you this. Obviously, you might not want to reveal any secrets or whatever, but I think everybody knows your interest in Max Scherzer, a former Missouri Tiger. Personally, I'm kind of high on Scherzer myself. I have to admit, it seems like the last 2 or 3 years that he was coming in with a lot of hype and a lot of great, peripherals and underlying stats, but that his ERA and his WHIP actually didn't come out as good to what they should be. Last year, he seemed to put everything together. Personally, I think he's definitely in my top 5 starting pitchers, if not my top 3. But I'm probably not going to be one of the teams that's going to spend big on a pitcher. So, how high is Scherzer on your pitching board? Would you consider taking Scherzer over Yu Darvish?
Would I consider taking him? That's a tough question because outside of the St. Louis Cardinals, Max Scherzer is probably my favorite player in baseball. Okay, aside from our Cardinals, right?
Right.
And one thing I've found historically is you can be very foolish and overpay for somebody if they're your favorite player. We've seen Brad do it with the Cubs, and you know what I mean. And of course, Michael will pay any price to get Laser Show, right? So you kind of have to be realistic going into it. And the reason why I traded for Max Scherzer last year is, firstly, he's a phenomenal pitcher, and number 2, Strasburg's numbers just weren't coming along as quickly as they were. And I knew I needed strikeouts and power pitching if I wasn't going to have any saves. I don't know how high I'm willing to go on Scherzer. So I don't know how high I'm willing to go on any pitcher. Pitching is pretty deep this year. And I think Scherzer will probably go for somewhere around $27 to $30. And that's just a lot of money to spend. So, it depends. I'm high on him because I think he's a phenomenal pitcher, but I just don't know if it's gonna, it might get too pricey for me.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Looking at the rest of the rotation, they've got that Missouri Tiger in there, but they've also got a Razorback. Drew Smiley, former Arkansas Razorback, had a pretty nice career in college. He was pretty good last year. He got some spot starts and was kind of used as that swing pitcher where he would, occasionally step in and start some games, but mostly they used him out of the bullpen. And even Brad, who came up with that crazy strategy to pick up like 3 relief pitchers that were not closers and to insert them into his lineup every day, Drew Smiley was one of his guys. So I think Drew Smiley could have some nice sleeper appeal. I don't think he's going to go for more than $1 or $2, but he's somebody to keep an eye on, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's another one of those rotations where everybody could be owned, by the end of the year, and that's only because their offense, I think, is going to be so potent in what's a pretty weak division. So yeah, Drew Smiley he could be one of those guys that I don't know if he'll get drafted, but I think he will get picked up at some point throughout the year. Same thing with Porcello. They're going to be guys that are going to have their ups and downs, but when they're hot,
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. And Verlander, he was on my team. I drafted him last year. I was very disappointed. He was horrible, considering what my expectations were for him. But he did finish the year really strong. Was pretty good in the playoffs too. I'm not buying a total bounce back, to be honest. I don't think he's a top, not even a top 5 pitcher anymore. I think Yahoo's probably got him around top 10. I can see that. I'd probably put him down 12, 13, something like that. But I think Verlander is one of those guys that if you're Drew, he seems like the classic Drew pick trying to buy on a bounce back, which, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I am probably, just because I was burned on him last year, I think I'm going to be out of the Verlander sweepstakes this year because I think he's going to go for close to $25 or so, and I'm not willing to spend that on a pitcher where I don't feel 100% sure that he's going to bounce back.
Would you take him if you can get him for less than 20?
I probably would, but I almost would rather have Anibal Sanchez if it wasn't for durability concerns. Just going off what I think the numbers will be this year, I feel a little bit safer about what Anibal will do.
I'm not high on Sanchez at all this year.
Really?
I think he's going to come back down to earth a little bit. I do. He is he's somebody who's not on my radar at all. Because of what I think it'll cost to get him. I think if you could get Anibal Sanchez for $12, I think you take him, but I think he's going to go for north of 20, and I just don't think it's worth the investment.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that he's going to be on my team. In fact, I don't think he will, but I do respect Sanchez. I had him even back when he was on the Marlins, and obviously his stats weren't nearly as good, but I always liked that he had a low walk rate and a pretty good strikeout rate, and he really put it all together last year. But you do have to worry if he can hold up for the entire season, where you never worry about that with Verlander.
Yep, exactly.
Anything else you want to bring up with the Tigers before we move on to the next team?
I just love this team. They've got 2 players from Mizzou on here. They are named the Tigers, and I think that they're going to run away with this division. I think that this team is deep when it comes to fantasy players.
So who's the second Missouri Tiger? I didn't catch that.
Ian Kinsler.
Oh, I didn't realize he went to Mizzou.
You're darn right, he did.
All right, now, before we move on to the next team, I can't believe I almost forgot to bring this up. Did you see Kinsler's comments that he made towards his former GM?
Yeah, he hopes the Rangers go 0 and 162, and what did he call John Daniels?
He called him a sleazeball. He said that every time he talked to him, he never felt like he could be totally honest because he didn't trust that what he would say would be held in confidence.
I was listening to Mad Dog Sports on the way home Friday or Thursday, I can't remember what it was, and Chris Russo, Mad Dog, was interviewing John Daniels, and they were talking about that, and boy, you could tell he was trying really hard to be PC, but he didn't want to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And asked him about those Kinsler comments. I love whenever players actually say what's on their mind. It was refreshing to see. Just be honest and move on.
Yeah. And I don't really know how that's going to hold up with all of his former teammates, but it seems like they didn't really call him out for it. They're like, I like Kinsler, what he says. He's on a different team now. We're going to try to win. They were being professional about it. But I'm like you. I kind of like seeing a player not have to be politically correct, and it's refreshing because you don't see it very often.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move over to the Cleveland Indians. Going back and just looking at this team last year, I had almost forgotten that they won 90 games last year because you don't really see them as being a playoff team. They lost Ubaldo Jimenez. Other than that, without looking at the team right now, from what I remember, the roster is still fairly intact from what it was last year. Just a couple guys I want to ask you about. First is Danny Salazar. He's getting a lot of hype. Yahoo's got him ranked really high. I think he's in the top 30 or 35. And he only pitched 50-something innings last year. Obviously had great stats, but that's a really short sample size. And I had picked him up at some point, and the starts he was getting, they were really trying to limit his innings, and he was going like 4-5 innings max, and they'd pull him out of the game. So, maybe they do extend him this year, but I think he's a guy that is not going to finish the year. I think they're going to cap his innings out.
Yeah, and when you're a team like Cleveland, you can't afford to go out and spend a ton of money. You really have to make sure you take good care of your young players, especially your young arms. I agree with you on Danny Salazar. And he's not the first pitcher we're going to talk about tonight with a lot of hype surrounding him as far as young pitchers. I think what it comes down to on draft day, it just depends on the price. You know what I mean? If a lot of people buy into the hype and he starts going for $10 to $15, then you definitely stay away. But you get him for $1 or $2, it might be worth the risk. So you got to figure he's going to get to pitch against the Twins quite a bit, and some other bottom feeders. So it might not be a bad grab.
Yep, and same with the Indians. There's been a lot of buzz about Carlos Santana possibly shifting to third base this year, or playing a lot more first base and DH, and trying to really create more at bats for Yan Gomes at catcher. Is Yan Gomes on your radar to draft today, or do you think that that's just not settled yet at the catcher position, and you'd rather look somewhere else?
I don't know. Yahoo doesn't have him ranked, and I think he's probably about the 14th or 15th catcher.
Yeah,
maybe lower than that is what Yahoo has him ranked. But one thing that really stood out to me was that he did hit 11 home runs in 88 games last year. So you would have to think that over the course of a full season, he'd probably come maybe not double it, but I think he might end up with an 18, 19 home run type stat line, which isn't bad to get out of a catcher. I would almost put him down. It's sort of like with Jason Castro, and guys like that, where you've decided that you're not going to spend any money on a catcher at all. You get one late in the draft, and you're looking to fill one stat, maybe home runs or something like that. Then he might be worth taking.
Now I'm going to put you on the spot here, and if you don't want to answer, that's fine, because I know that you might not want to give away everything that you're going to do on draft day. But former Cardinal sitting there at closer, John Axford. A lot of apparently he turned things around somewhat for the Cardinals, a lot better than he was in Milwaukee, and a lot of people have attributed that to the fact that he was tipping pitches, and the Cardinals really clued him in on that after the trade was made. Is Axford somebody that you're interested in, or is he not somebody you're interested in, or are you not interested in any closers at all?
I'm not interested in Axford, I'll tell you that.
Okay.
I don't consider him a former Cardinal. I think he just kind of stopped in and helped us out a little bit, and really, we did him a favor.
Yeah.
Okay? He got to come into our system, and and this is going to sound arrogant, but I think you could take almost any pitcher, special pitcher in base, put them with Yachty, and they're going to look great.
I'm looking at their roster, and they've also got Scrabble back there. Zepchinski, I guess, is part of the Indians. Their bullpen now. Not that matters at all. Just wanted to point that out.
Good old Zepchinski. But the funny thing is, I look at the Indians lineup before we move away from them, and really I see, 5, 6 guys or more that I think will either be owned or owned at some point in the season. And that's pretty crazy for a team that, won 90 games, but I think they highly overachieved. They got a career year out of Zach McAllister. I don't know if that'll happen again. But they seem like a pretty solid and steady lineup.
Yeah, I would say that they seem steady. That's a good word to use, because they don't have, I wouldn't say they have bad hitters, but they don't have great hitters either. Kipnis is their best hitter, Santana, second best hitter, third best hitter, I guess, is maybe Swisher. So it's not like stacked, but it's not horrible either. Let me ask you this. Michael Bourne, he only stole like 20-something bases last year. He's normally someone you can pencil in for closer to 50 or so. I've never, ever had interest in Michael Bourne for fantasy just because he's too much of a one-trick pony, and I'm not going to have any interest in him again. But do you like those kind of players that are all or nothing? Like if he was safe bet to get 40 or 50 steals, are those the kind of players that you target, or do you like somebody that's a little bit more well-rounded than that?
Well, let me ask you this. Would you take Michael Bourne at 40 or 50 steals or Billy Hamilton at 75 steals? With what's going to cost to get to, I think Billy Hamilton's probably going to cost you $12 to $15. Michael Bourne you can probably get for $1 at the end of the draft.
Yeah.
Which player would you rather have?
Might sound stupid, but I'd rather have Hamilton.
Really?
I just don't like Bourne. I don't think that he's going to, maybe he does steal 40 bases. I just feel like he's replacement level. I feel like for sure I can find somebody in the waiver wire that is going to put up similar stats, whether it be Rajai Davis when some outfielder gets out and he's playing every day or something like that. So I'm definitely out on Bourne.
I don't know if I consider him a one-trick pony. I think he had a down year last year, but he's typically around a 270 hitter, 275 hitter. Right. I think that's a much higher average than Hamilton's going to carry.
That's a valid point. Yeah.
For me, for the value, I think if I'm going to try to draft steals, then I think I'm probably going to take Bourne over Hamilton, just knowing he's going to at least help me in 2 or 3 categories.
And one more guy I wanted to ask you about on this team before we move on, Justin Masterson. I think he was on Brandon's team last year. A guy that I've never really. I think I may have even drafted him one year, but he had a really bad year to start off the season. Never really bounced back. But I think Justin Masterson, what he did last year, it's not going noticed enough. I think he's really being undervalued right now, and he's a guy that I've got my eye on for draft day. I think he could go for a great value. And another point, just with the Cleveland Indians in general, based on what I had looked at late in the season with park factors, I can't even remember the name of their stadium, and I pretty much know everyone in baseball. Progressive Field, I think, is maybe what it is.
Yeah, it used to be called Jacobs Field back when stadiums actually had cool names. But
Yeah.
I think now it's all corporate stuff, right? Okay. Yeah, I think it's progressive. I think
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah, I think it's Progressive. Anyway, they had one of the most favorable home ballparks for pitchers in all of baseball, so I like Masterson this year.
Yeah, you know what? I haven't given Masterson much thought. I thought he was another one of those guys like McAllister that jumped off the charts last year.
Yeah.
And I think a team like Cleveland has to have players do that if they're going to win 90 games. But, I just don't know if those pitchers can come out and surprise people this year. I think Masterson's always had it in him. I think he's always had the stuff. But now he is the surefire bona fide ace. So we'll see how he does with that pressure. I think it'll be interesting.
All right, let's move on to the Kansas City Royals. And before we just talk individually about the players on this team, how big of a fan are you or Brandon of this Kansas City Royals team? Because I know you guys both live. I think Brandon still lives there, and you used to live there. So, I mean, do you like this team at all, or are you all 100% Cardinals? I mean, can you like both of them?
No, we're 100% Cardinals. The one thing we did like about the Royals was that, it was $7 to go see a game. You pretty much walk up any day.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of good players that came through there. I mean, we saw Beltran play there. We saw Jermaine Dye. We saw Johnny Damon. We've seen a lot of really good, Zach Greinke, see a lot of really good players come through Kansas City, which was kind of cool. But, they'd only be there for a couple of years and they'd be gone. It was kind of like watching a minor league.
Yeah,
almost.
that's what I was going to say when you were naming those players. I was just thinking, man, that's sad, 'cause that's definitely some talented players, but all of them left or they traded them. So I guess that they weren't in a win now situation, and those guys left. So
I will say this, and I'm a Cardinals fan, so I come from one of the best baseball towns in the country. When the Royals are good, Kansas City is an awesome baseball town, and Kauffman Stadium is. And you saw it last year, or the year before, Ryan. It is an awesome place to see a game.
Yeah, I love Kauffman Stadium. I've probably been to like 4 or 5 parks, and Kauffman is right up there. I haven't been to the new Busch yet, so I can't compare that. But I've been to Yankee Stadium. I've been to the new Yankee Stadium, and I much prefer Kauffman Stadium to it. It's just a lot more fun atmosphere.
Oh, it's a great atmosphere. It's just that whole complex there with Arrowhead and everything. It's a fantastic place to see a game. And it was nice because you don't have to deal with downtown and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that, we want the Royals to do well, but I wouldn't call us Royals fans by any stretch.
Yeah, so it's kind of one of those teams. It's a rivalry, but they've kind of been so bad for so long that you almost feel kind of sorry for them, and you feel like you can root for them a little bit just because they aren't really a legit threat.
Yeah, it's definitely not a rivalry. So
yeah, so they've got a lot of young, talented players that are coming up. A lot of them still very, very young. And I guess we'll just start off with Eric Hosmer at first base. I think the key to his season last year is, I don't know if you remember, but they fired their hitting coach and hired George Brett. And he really went from a guy that shouldn't have even been owned to a guy that really took off and was one of the best first basemen down the stretch last year. George Brett is gone, but they do have a new hitting coach. I don't know who it is, but it was a change of scenery. Apparently, the previous hitting coach was wanting these guys to hit more doubles and not go for the home run. But when they really put in the power swing into their game, they played a lot better. So are you buying into Hosmer this year?
Yeah, what did he end up? He ended up like number 3 or 4 first baseman at the end, didn't he?
Yeah, I don't.
Top 5 first baseman.
I don't have it pulled up, but yeah, I think it was definitely close to being a top 5 first baseman, and he's obviously one of the few that can steal some bases too.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to like about this whole Royals lineup, and if you're going to learn how to hit, who better to learn from than George Brett? So yeah, I think all those guys benefited a lot from it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much Hosmer's going to go for, but I think that if you miss out on one of the upper tier, like a Paul Goldschmidt, Chris Davis type, then I don't think Hosmer's a bad person to slot in your first base.
So is he? See, I'm interested in Hosmer. You know, the upside is there. He's got the good pedigree. But I have to be honest that I'm a little concerned because he's been so inconsistent throughout his career. Does that bother you?
I think, yeah, well, yeah, it does, but I also understand that, like a lot of the players in this lineup, he's young. I think that if you're going to draft Hosmer, I think that you need to have a contingency plan for in case he does come out flat. Have someone else you can slot in there, and you know that could be somebody you pick up later. You know, even like a Brandon Moss or somebody. You know what I mean? Somebody who you know is going to hit 25, 30 home runs. He's not going to do much else, but yeah, I think you need to have a plan B just in case.
All right, and let's talk about the third baseman, Mike Moustakas, another guy that has the big pedigree, a big-time prospect, and he really has not lived up to the hype at all. Where you've seen at least flashes from Hosmer, you haven't really seen that from Moustakas, but he's still very young, and from what I've read, he's really hitting the ball extremely well in the preseason. I think he's already hit 3 home runs. I don't even know if he's going to be drafted or not, but he's somebody that I'm looking at. If I were to miss out at third base and really decide to go wait to the very, very end, is he on your radar, or you just want to see him do something before you're even willing to take a chance on him?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd still like to see his offense come around. It's crazy to me because there was so much hype surrounding him from the time the Royals drafted him. I think he was a first-round pick for them one year, if not a number one overall pick. Okay, because I know they went through a stretch here where they had the number one overall pick for a few years in a row. And I think the only player in their lineup that was hyped more than Moustakas coming through the system was Alex Gordon. And his offense, Moustakas, his offense has not come around. I thought there'd be a lot more power. But, you know, looking at this lineup projection, they have slotted at 7th behind Salvador Perez, and you know, Perez is not a power hitter.
Yeah, see, that does worry me, seeing him that low in the lineup. I never want to own a guy that's going to hit lower than 6th, and preferably in the top 5 in the order. So that would definitely put a sting on his value. You mentioned Alex Gordon. He's been under the radar a little bit. I think he's been a lot better than people have realized, but you know, I for one have been just so bored even talking about Alex Gordon, but he's been hitting close to 300. I think he's hitting about 20 home runs the last couple of years and doing his fair share of run scoring and RBIs. He doesn't have a big hole in his lineup, but he doesn't come with huge upside, I don't think, anymore. Despite that, you know, that high draft pick he once was, but I think if you can get Alex Gordon for $7 or $8, you might not be pumped about it, but at the end of the year, you might be happy with it.
Yeah, you know, 20 home runs, 81 RBIs, 11 steals, 265 average. Yeah, he's kind of one of those guys that you know, if you get late in the draft and, you know, you're willing to spend maybe $5, $6, $7 on a guy, you need to fill that third outfield spot. I don't think Gordon, there's nothing wrong with taking him. You know, he's just one of those guys who he consistently produces, and of course he generally is one of those guys who kind of starts slow. But the end of the year seems like his numbers are always there, and I think as far as looking at his lineup, I think he's probably the big star on the Royals. And, you know, he had to pick a star. And you know, he's on all the billboards and everything like that. So he is kind of they're trying to make him the face of the Royals. But you know, he's just solid, you know, steady player, and yeah, I think, you know, if you can get him for this high single digits, and I think you go for it.
I'm looking at his career stats, and particularly the last 3 seasons. He's played in at least 150 games each of the last 3 years, so he's durable. In those last 3 years, he scored at least 90 runs in all 3 seasons, at least 70 RBIs in 2 of the seasons. In 2 of the seasons, he had over 80 RBI, and he had 23, 14, and 20 home runs, so, you know, decent power. And steals, he had 17, 10, and 11, with 11 being last year. So he gives you a little bit of everything.
Yeah, he does. He's not going to blow you away in any certain category, but he contributes in 4 out of 5 categories pretty much every year.
He does that, and let me ask you. You mentioned Salvador Perez. He's the last one of those guys that has the real big hype around him in terms of position players. That's a young guy coming through. He's still very young, and just looking at him, he seems that he could be a really good hitter. He hits a lot of line drives, and I think he can be a 300 hitter. Like you said, I don't know if he's a power hitter. I don't know if he's going to hit you more than 10 home runs or so, but I like Perez. I do think he's going a little bit high for my taste in Yahoo drafts. I think he's even a spot ahead of Lucroy unless they updated those rankings. which I'd much rather have Lucroy, but I do think Perez, sitting at the end of a draft, I'd take him for $1 or $2 if I wanted to wait on catcher.
Yeah, I'd rather have LaCroix as well, because I think with catchers, especially if you wait till late in the draft, you're looking for him just to fill one or two stat lines. And of course, LaCroix is going to have a lot more power. But Perez is a good, solid hitter. Yeah, he's going to hit 300. I think that he was one of the two catchers that Brandon drafted last year. Had to make sure he had that backup. And I don't know if he ended up. I think he ended up dropping him pretty quick. And I don't know if Perez spent a lot of time on a lot of lineups, but he might be somebody this year that you look at and say, late in the draft, I need a catcher. I don't think he'd be a bad pickup at all for a couple dollars.
All right. Anything else you want to mention or talk about with the Royals before we move on?
No, I mean, other than the fact that I do like James Shields. I always have. He's going to get you a high amount of strikeouts, and I think as this team gets better, and I think they did get better this year, bringing in Aoki and Infante, I think that his wins are going to come up as well. So Shields is somebody who I think is might be a good pickup on draft day, because I don't think he'll cost as much as some of these $20 guys.
Yeah, I do want to. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the thing last year about the Royals, they had a really good staff. This year, I think it's kind of reversed. I look at their starting rotation; it doesn't blow me away. I like Shields at the top of the rotation, but other than that, I don't think there's a lot to get excited about. But the lineup is very solid all the way throughout. They filled up the second base spot, which had really been a problem for them with Gio Vitello and whoever else they tried to throw in there. And Infante is a solid hitter, and right field Aoki. I mean, they're not massive signings, but they're much improved at those positions than what they've been over Francoeur or whoever they've been trying to put in those spots the last couple of years.
They did as well as they could do with the money they have.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think they could have done any better. And then, of course, you got the stud closer at the back end with Greg Holland, too. So I think he'll be one of those closers. He's going to go for a lot of money for the guys that do like having closers.
All right, let's move on to the Chicago White Sox. They're kind of trying to remake this team and make them younger. They traded away. I'm sorry, they didn't trade away, but I don't really know if Konerko and Dunn are solid bets to get everyday at bats anymore. And they opened up a spot with their free agent signing of Jose Abreu at first base, Cuban defector. And are you interested in Jose Abreu? He's somebody that I wouldn't be surprised if he went for $10 or if he went for $2. I don't know what he's going to go for. I am a little intrigued just because some of these Cuban players that have come over recently have had some success. He's apparently got a lot of power, but there's just not a very good lineup around him. So, what's your take on Jose Abreu?
I don't know. He's hard to gauge, because there's no stats on him.
Yeah.
So you sit there and try to think, well, what is his value really? And I haven't heard much. Of course, I don't pay attention to the White Sox during spring training, so I haven't heard much. But you're right. He doesn't have much around him. He's got the gorilla hidden behind him. With Adam Dunn and the 219 hitter. So I don't think he has that much protection. I'm kind of surprised that they go with Adam Dunn at the DH instead of Paul Konerko. I thought Konerko still had some juice left, and I think he'd be a little bit more dangerous, give Abreu a little more protection. So I'm not sure. They did make the move, trading, making the trade to get Adam Eaton. Adam Eaton was somebody who I was really high on going into the draft last year. There was a lot of hype surrounding him, and of course he got hurt in spring training and just never really got on track. But he's somebody who might be one of those guys that maybe that doesn't get drafted but gets picked up later in the year. It could be
Yeah, I think that's a good call on Eaton because he had a pretty good track record in the minor leagues. As far as other people being ownable in this team, De Aza, he's a guy I'd probably have on my radar, but I'm not like super hyped about him. But he could be useful at times. And Avisail Garcia, I'm not going to draft him, but he's another good prospect that I'm going to keep my eye on. And other than that, besides their closer, Chris Sale is really the only other guy I've got any interest in.
Yeah, I mean, as far as getting drafted, I think you're 100% right. I think that Jose Quintana will probably spend some time on somebody's roster as they look to pick somebody up because he's got up and down. There's also, you got Nate Jones, the closer. Obviously, for people that want closers, I think that he'll be somebody that gets picked up. And then, of course, Macedo had that, monster year a couple years ago where he hit like 25 home runs. So there was, a lot of people thought he was really going to break out last year. He didn't do much, so I don't think he'll be owned either.
And let's move on to the team that will be battling the White Sox for last place in this division, the Minnesota Twins. These are got to be two of the worst teams. What are you talking about?
You don't think a team that has Ricky Nolasco as their ace?
Well, yeah, let's see. This is a team that's never been a big spending team. And what do? They go out, they sign Ricky Nolasco, Phil Hughes, and guys that they already. I think they signed Mike Pelfrey. He may have already been on the team, but anyway, you got Nolasco, Correa, Phil Hughes, Mike Pelfrey, and Vance Worley. I mean, that's horrible. That's got to be the worst rotation in baseball.
You're gonna hurt Big Ben's feelings trashing Vance Worley. No, man, it is. It's absolutely terrible. I don't know if there's
my gosh, this team is horrible. I'm just looking at this team. Oh my gosh.
It's like the movie Major League when they're looking at the roster and they're like, who are these fucking guys? Like nobody knows who they are. Other than Joe Mauer. And Joe Mauer's got to be looking around going, crap. There's nobody. I guess Willingham is serviceable. 2 years ago, you'll probably remember I had Jason Kubel.
Yeah.
And he got the absolute cover off the ball that year. And of course, last year was a down year. Who knows? Maybe he's back in Minnesota. Maybe that'll get him jump started again and he can get some of those power numbers back up.
Yeah, I mean Kubel, I'll keep him on my radar just because he's got a lot of power. I had him 4 or 5 years ago, and he had like a 30 home run season, so I know he's capable of it. Willingham's capable of having a good year, and Trevor Plouffe and Brian Dozier are guys that I keep an eye on. But as far as guys that I draft on draft night, Mauer's the only one. Dozier maybe. Well, obviously Glenn Perkins. Every team is going to have a closer that's draftable, but that's the worst roster I've seen so far that we've been doing these previews on.
Worse than the Marlins?
I think so.
Yeah, you're probably right, because at least the Marlins have a set number one starter.
At least they have Jose Fernandez and Eovaldi. I even like him better than any of these pitchers. I don't know. I guess Nolasco's pretty close, but I don't like this team at all.
None of these guys will be owned. Nolasco might be picked up for spot starts for streaming. Every now and then, maybe Hughes if he gets hot, but this roster's terrible, and I really don't even want to talk about it anymore.
All right, I don't either. So let's move on. Let's go to the AL.
So we gotta pick AL.
Oh yeah. You keeping us on track. I'm definitely picking the Tigers. I don't know. I might pick one of these teams as a wild card, but I'm going to reserve that till the end.
Okay, I might as well, but yeah, definitely the Tigers win the Central.
And right, and let's go to the AL West. This is a really, really good division, as is the AL East when we'll get to them, but the AL West is pretty stacked. I don't really know which team to start off with because I can see three that could potentially win the division, and wouldn't rule out a fourth as being a wild, maybe a team that could sneak in there, although I don't think it'll happen. Let's just talk about the Los Angeles Angels. Might as well start off with Trout, Pujols, Hamilton. So, I mean, we all know what there is to say about Trout. I, for one, don't even think he's reached his potential yet. So he's a guy I'm very interested in, of course, as everybody is. As far as Josh Hamilton coming through with a bounce back or Pujols, if you had to pick one, which one do you feel safer about with a bounce back?
I would say Josh Hamilton.
And do you feel good about that, or is that just because I made you pick one?
I don't feel good about it. You just asked me to pick one.
Yeah.
So I would say Josh Hamilton ahead of Albert Pujols. And part of that is, Hamilton's Hamilton's a little bit younger than Pujols, right? Am I right on that?
I think so. I think Pujols is.
Yeah, I mean, nobody knows what Pujols' real age is.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
You know what I mean? I mean, he's probably like 42 for all we know. But, I just think that big frame is breaking down. And, of course, with Hamilton, I mean, he's put his body through a lot of abuse over the years, so he just might be breaking down, too. I don't know. I wouldn't consider either one of those guys on my radar. Those are almost the kind of guys you nominate just to get other people to burn some money away. I did that to you last year. I threw Pujols out there, and of course you threw down some money on him, and it made it where you didn't have the fortitude to go up and grab Trout. So that's Pujols for me. I would never own him as a Cardinal fan personally. And Hamilton, they don't fit the way I want my team made up.
Yeah, I have to be honest, just in terms of, it sounds like you have a lot of resentment towards Pujols, and honestly, he was my favorite player before he left, and I don't know who's my favorite player, maybe with the Cardinals, I guess maybe Wainwright or somebody like that, I'm not even sure, but I like this Angels team just personally in real life, Trout, Pujols, David Freese is one of my all-time favorites. So it's a team that I'll root for, obviously with the connection to the Travelers here in Little Rock as well. I like Jared Weaver a lot. I don't really care for C.J. Wilson, but anyway.
Yeah. And we're on opposite ends of the spectrum. I don't like the Angels at all. I mean, I really don't. I don't know if I ever root for them to ever do anything. I like Mike Trout. I think he's fun to watch. He's a fantastic player. Pujols, I think is done. I think Hamilton's close to done. I think Freese hit his potential. Now he's on the backslide. I mean, Freese is 30 years old, right? 31, something like that. I mean, he came up and really started developing late. So, this team's good, obviously, on paper, but, like we saw last year, they didn't even crack 500, so I'm going to hold reserve judgment on that. I was amazed by how well C.J. Wilson did last year. I remember somebody cut him, right?
Yeah, I think
I don't remember who cut him, and then somebody else picked him up, and he just took off and ended up having a great year. So Wilson could end up being the ace of the staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've loved Jared Weaver over the last few years, but there's no doubt that his strikeout rate has just gone way, way down. That's a huge concern. I think it was definitely under 7 Ks per 9 last year. But normally he does have good control. It's going to get you a low whip. Let me ask you about Cole Calhoun in left field. He is a guy that is pretty well-rounded. Maybe a poor man's Alex Gordon. I think he could be hitting leadoff potentially in this lineup, and if he does, I think he's interesting. So do you have any interest with Calhoun, or maybe wait to see what happens after the season starts and hopefully he's on free agents?
Yeah, I think I'd have to wait and see what happens. I also have to wait and see how the draft goes. I could stand here and say, yeah, I'm interested in him, but as we get down towards the end of the draft, I need to see how my team is made up. He's somebody who I definitely think has a lot of potential, and you get him in the lineup and get him playing every day. He might produce for you. I don't know if he'll lead off. I think that's going to be an Ibar, but he could still be a solid contributor in a lineup where there's where he could stand to the radar.
All right, let me ask you this. One last question, then we'll move on to the next team. Which pitcher would you be most willing to take a chance on between Garrett Richards, Tyler Skaggs, and Hector Santiago?
Man, that's a good question. I would probably say Hector Santiago.
I agree with you there. I do think that Skaggs is a little bit interesting. He had some good starts last year. He had some bad ones. All three of those guys have pretty good minor league numbers, and I think Santiago's got the most upside, but he also has a pretty big walk rate. But he's somebody to keep an eye on. Let's move on.
Yeah, well, I owned Santiago last year when he was with the White Sox.
Yeah, I owned him for a little bit.
He was serviceable, and what I mean by that is, I didn't expect him to, pitch it at a high level, but he never got blown up.
Right.
And there's something to be said about that. If you have a pitcher on the back end of your rotation, he just kind of comes out, and he's, maybe doesn't always get your wins or always get your strikeouts, but he's able to maintain your ERA. That's a good asset to have.
Yeah, and occasionally he'll come up with one of those 11, 12 strikeout games too.
Yeah, occasionally, yeah.
All right, let's move on and talk about the Texas Rangers. And to be honest, when I was looking at doing a mock draft a few weeks ago, I'd completely forgotten that they had Alex Rios.
You forgot?
Yeah, I had just completely forgotten that they had Alex Rios. So the lineup to me just looks a lot better than I had realized. With Fielder, Beltre, Rios in the middle of the lineup, and then they've got Andrews and obviously Profar. They've got a lot of interesting pieces. So right now, I definitely like the Rangers better in terms of real life than the Angels. Which one of those hitters in the lineup do you think you're going to be taking a chance on? Are you buying a bounce back with Fielder now that he's in a better ballpark?
I've never been one to really pay a lot of attention to Prince Fielder, to be honest with you. I don't know why. I've just never been willing to pay what Fielder costs. I'll tell you, the two players that really stand out to me that I like is, of course, Alex Rios. I just like how well-rounded his game is. I think those kind of outfielders, the ones that get you 20 and 25 home runs, 20 to 30 steals, those are valuable guys to have.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's in a great lineup now. Not a lot of pressure hitting behind Beltre. And then the other one is Chu. Okay? I think that Chu coming over and hitting the top of the order in Texas, which, as good as the Cincinnati lineup is, I think the Texas lineup has been. So, it's a very hitter Park, I think that Chu is poised to have a huge year.
Yeah, if Fielder shows up and is the Milwaukee Brewers fielder instead of what he's been the last couple of years in Detroit, this is probably the best lineup in baseball right now. I mean, Chu is a great on-base guy. We know that Beltre is going to drive in 100. He does it every year. Alex Rios stole 40 bases last year, and he's got power too. There's not a whole lot of holes in this lineup except maybe at catcher where they've got Giovanni Soto and J.P. Arancibia. Everywhere else, even Leonis Martin, for what he is when they're going to hit him low in the order, I like Martin. If he was hitting higher in the lineup, if they didn't have Chu, I would be interested in drafting Martin.
Yeah, I think their only holes are in their pitching staff, to be honest with you.
And
because, you got Derek Holland out until, the All-Star break.
Yeah.
So that hurts. Harrison, of course, is a health issue as well. So other than Darvish, I mean, you got Martin Perez, who's not bad. And then you got to roll the dice with Gondo and Colby Lewis. You got another former Missouri Tiger there, Nick Tepish, who might get some time in the rotation while Holland is hurt. But I just don't think with the way the ball carries in that yard, that's just not the kind of pitching staff I'd want to roll out there.
Now, with Chu hitting at the top of this lineup, Carpenter hitting at the top of the Cardinals lineup, which one of those two guys do you think scores more runs this year?
That's a good question. I would probably still go with Carpenter.
Yeah.
Only because I think the Cardinals are in an easier division.
Yeah, I can see that.
But I think Chu is gonna score a lot of runs being in that lineup.
Is there any player you want to talk about in particular? I think there's we kind of know what these players are. They're good, the ones that we mentioned. Is there anything else you want to say about any of these guys?
Do you think Elvis Andrus is going to reach his full potential this year? It seems like every year, you're waiting for this big breakout season.
I think he kind of is closer to what he was last year, which is, I'll be honest, a lot better than I realized. I think me and Drew said on our podcast that he led all shortstops in runs scored. He stole over 40 bases. I think that's kind of what he is a steals guy, a lot of runs, a decent average, not much else, which is, considering shortstop is so weak, it's not too bad. I just don't really care for the guys that are speed guys. I guess I try to build my team more around having power.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't have anything else to say about Texas.
All right, let's move on to the Oakland A's, and you could easily make a case that this is the team to contend with atop this division.
2 years in a row, won the division.
Yeah.
So, they are the champs.
Yeah, and last year, number one player in fantasy baseball the first 2 weeks, Coco Crisp on my team. Man, he was just cracking out homers and I think he had 7 home runs in the month of April for Crisp, which is crazy. He's hitting 400. I don't know what happened. He had a little 2-week stay on the DL, came back, never was the same.
No, what happened was he went to the DL, came back, and he was Coco Crisp.
And he became himself.
He got hurt, came back, and became the player he actually should have been.
Yeah. I got to be honest, too. I got to be honest.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I cannot even take any credit for that. I think it was the very last pick of the entire draft, and I was kind of scrambling. And I think the clock might have even expired on me, or if it wasn't expired, I just kind of made a panic pick and just couldn't have worked out any better, considering that he went for $1 in the first 2 weeks of the year. He was on fire. But when he came back, I have to be honest with that as well, that I did hold on to him a little bit too long, trying to trade him and trying to see if he's going to return to playing as good as he was. And as good as it was for me early on, it kind of hurt me because I was waiting for that bounce back. He was ranked too high on the season for me to feel like I could drop him, which is eventually what happened. I did drop him.
If you would have told me when you drafted him that Coco Crisp was going to have that kind of production for the first 2 weeks of the year, I would have bet you my car or my children.
Yeah.
You probably would have been the recipient of either one. That was crazy, and it's not happening again.
This is a team that has a bunch of guys that seem to overachieve, other than Cespedes, who didn't really meet up to standards last year. But the one guy I want to ask you about, it's got to be Josh Donaldson at third base. I mean, he was awesome last year. I think he was a top 30 player. I have to be honest. I mean, I don't fully buy into it. Do you?
To Josh Donaldson?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm never willing to go against anything any decision that Billy Bean makes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that their talent evaluation and of course, a lot of teams have really gotten into this Moneyball thing. But he always seems to find players that just, come out of nowhere. I mean, think about what Josh Reddick did 2 years ago. Okay, and you talk about these guys that I had never heard of Josh Reddick. I had never heard of Josh Donaldson. And Jed Lowry, just slow and steady. These guys just produce. And I don't know if that plan will ever win a World Series, but it sure does make the team awfully competitive. And in a division with Texas and Los Angeles, if you can win the division 2 years in a row with that payroll, I think you're probably the smartest guy in the room.
And I think everybody loves the A's, and just in real life, I think how can you not admire this team? Just the way that they put together their roster full of a bunch of non-All-Stars and are able to win divisions year in, year out for the last few years. I mean, they've been crazy good.
I absolutely love it.
And I like their.
Let me ask you, moving down to the pitching staff real quick.
Okay.
A lot of hype around Sonny Gray.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring him up because obviously his major league stats were incredible last year when he got called up. I think he had like a 2.67 ERA, something like that, and his strikeout rate was incredible. It was over 9. I'm trying to, I haven't really fully dove into looking at all the pitcher stats yet, but I did notice that in the minor leagues last year in AAA, Sonny Gray's strikeout rate was like under 6, and then he came to the majors and had a strikeout rate of over 9. It was crazy. I don't really know what you can attribute that to, but he did have normally a pretty good strikeout rate in the minors other than last year. I'm a little concerned about that, but all in all, I like Sonny Gray, mainly because the ballpark he's pitching in, the division he's in. I know it's a good division, but you're pitching in Oakland Coliseum, you're pitching in Angel Stadium, and Safeco Field, great venues to pitch in. And then the other team, the Astros.
Yeah, well, and you don't know what goes into that minor league stuff. Sonny Gray's on his way to the majors. Everybody knows that. Were they telling him work on pitching to contact?
Right.
You know what I mean? We don't really care whether you go out there and win these AAA games, but work on this. And of course he gets the majors and he turns the arm back on. That could have been the case. I know there was a lot of hype surrounding him last year. I had him on my radar. Not the same way I had Zach Wheeler on my radar, but I had him on my radar, and I think somebody beat me to him. But well, I tell you what, he's another one of those guys, kind of like whoever we talked about earlier,
Danny Salazar.
Yeah, Salazar, who one of those young pitchers or a Garrett Cole type that is just getting a lot of buzz right now.
Yeah, and I think this rotation, they got Jared Parker, Sonny Gray, Scott Kazmir, Dan Straley, and AJ Griffin. I think at some point, all 5 of those guys will probably be owned this year. None of them are just going to blow you out and scream that you're going to get an ace. Maybe Sonny Gray's going to have that hype. But I think all of these guys do bring something to the table, whether it's streaming with a nice matchup. In particular, the guys that I think I like the best are Kazmir and Straley.
They're both good. I owned Jared Parker 2 years ago, and he was real good for me. He didn't get blown up a lot. I think he got blown up a bit more last year. But he didn't get blown up much. He was just kind of sure and steady, and kept my ERA down. He's another one of those guys. So I think out of all those guys, if I were to if I had to take somebody, I would take Parker because I know what I'm getting with him. Where Gray is still a little bit of a question mark.
All right, let's move on to the Seattle Mariners. Obviously, they signed Cano. They got Corey Hart in right field. They've made a lot of moves. They still have a lot of decent young players. Kyle Seager, Dustin Ackley was a big-time prospect. Both of those guys were teammates at UNC. I think they're both top 5 picks. And Ackley's really been hitting the ball well this year, and I think he's going to be playing outfield. Not necessarily somebody that's on my radar to draft, but I think they've got some nice young pieces. I also forgot to mention Nick Franklin and Brad Miller, 2 guys I like. They're going to be competing at shortstop. I think it's a solid lineup now.
It's a solid lineup. I think that it's going to project better in fantasy than it's going to in real life. I still think this is probably the 4th best team in the AL West. Mm-hmm. But you're right. They've got a lot of young guys that are up and coming. Of course, they went out and spent all that money on Cano, brought in Corey Hart, who, if Corey Hart has a bounce back season, that signing is going to look brilliant. Okay. The one player I'm waiting on, and it seems like Seattle continues to wait on, is Justin Smoke. He was supposed to be a big time power guy, and I just haven't seen it yet. Yeah, I mean
they traded Cliff Lee to get Smoke, and he has had some flashes, hasn't put it together. Another big prospect, Mike Zunino at catcher. I mean, this team, you might not realize it for the average fan, but most of these players in their starting lineup were big time prospects. And they also got Logan Morrison in right field. I wouldn't say that they have, it's a dominant lineup or anything, but if some of these young players put it together, and I think Kyle Seager's already there, I think this could be a team that sneaks up on you because obviously they've got 2 or 3 guys at the top of the rotation that are going to put up some pretty good numbers in Felix and Iwakuma when he does come back.
Yeah, and then Tawad Walker, who is another one of those young pitchers, is getting a lot of hype right now, a lot of buzz. It is a good team. I think when you look at it, I think it's a good team that is unfortunately in a very strong division. I think if Seattle was in the AL Central, then I think that I would certainly say they're the second best team. I think they would probably, push the Tigers just because they would get a lot more wins beating up on their AL Central, opponents. But I think in the West, they're young, and you're right about the prospects, but I still think that they're probably a year or two away.
Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing. I don't think they're going to be that great this year, but they've got a good future. Any player you want to talk about in particular?
That stadium's fantastic too, by the way. I've never been there, but every time I watch it on TV, I'm like, I have got to go see a game.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my top 5 favorite, along with PNC and AT&T. I love those venues as well. I guess, which one of the shortstops do you prefer to see win the starting job, Brad Miller or Nick Franklin, or do you really care?
Nick Franklin was on my wish list for a long time last year. So, there was a lot of buzz around him last year getting called up and doing great things. And of course he was called up and it just didn't really catch fire the way I thought it would. I don't really care. As long as whoever they use is serviceable in case I ever need a shortstop. But I don't have a preference there.
Yeah, it's weird because they actually put together pretty similar stats. I like both of these players, and I hope that I don't know how they would do it, but I really wish that they could find a way to get both of the guys in the lineup consistently, which isn't going to happen since they signed Cano and Seager. They're not going to bench Seager at third base, and Ackley's already manning a spot in the outfield. But I like both of their potential.
Yeah, I do too. I think that they're going to run into a situation here the next couple of years where they're going to have a wealth of talent. That's a good position to be in.
All right, let's move on to Houston. Obviously, probably not a whole lot to talk about here, so we'll try not to spend quite as much time on the teams that don't matter. But there's really not a whole lot of players that are draft-worthy on this team, but one of them that is the short man, 5'5", Jose Altuve. He's kind of been a one-trick pony, so to speak, although he does give you a good average. But average and steals, that's really what you're going to get from Altuve. I don't know if you're going to get a whole lot else. But second base isn't particularly deep, so he might be somebody that I will draft on, and I guess on Saturday.
Yeah, I think you have to like his potential to score runs this season. If Castro and Carter can continue to display the kind of power they showed late last year, you'd have to think that, and obviously with their general manager being the former Cardinal guy, Jeff Luhnow, he's going to put the pieces together and put together a good team. I like the trades for Dexter Fowler. Bring in a guy, a veteran guy who can at times be very good. I mean, I've owned Dexter Fowler both the last 2 seasons, and I really only ever played him when Colorado was at home. But you do have to like that short porch out there, in Houston. I think that Fowler can do well, and I think he might be somebody who maybe doesn't get drafted, but could still end up being owned.
I agree with you there. I think Fowler is a guy that's even better in real life than he is in fantasy, which is kind of unique because he is a guy that can give you steals and some power. But he has a really good on-base percentage, a good batting eye, and I think he might be a guy that's featured in the middle of that lineup, considering I could see them hitting Altuve leadoff, possibly Fowler maybe third or something. Do you see a projected lineup for this team?
The projection I'm looking at right now has Fowler leadoff, Altuve second, and Castro third, Carter fourth.
Okay.
Is the lineup right now, and then of course after the number 4 spot, I couldn't tell you anybody that you want to own. Maybe Jonathan Villar if you're at the end of the draft and you need a shortstop, and all you really want to do is lock down steals because he'll get you a lot of them. And that was one thing I looked at looking at this lineup. This is a fast team, and so that's going to play well in their stadium.
Yeah, anytime you are limited in talent and not really ready to compete just yet for a division, they're going to compensate a little bit and try to manufacture some runs at their speed. Other than these guys that we've already mentioned, there's really only one other person that I think has to be brought up in this discussion. That's a guy that's not going to be starting the opening day roster more than likely. Is George Springer. Any thoughts on George Springer?
He's getting a lot of buzz. I think he's going to be somebody who's going to end up on a lot of our watch list.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that as he gets called up, I think there's probably going to be a race to jump on him and at least slot him in somewhere to see what he does. But yeah, and I think that we're probably going to be having that same conversation about a lot of Houston Astros players over the next few years as they continue to stockpile number one picks and things like that. I will say it's just sad that seeing the Astros in the American League. I do miss having them in the National League. I liked it when the Cardinals went down to Houston. I always thought that was that there for a while was a good rivalry when both teams were good.
I thought you were going to say more along the lines of I miss going down to Houston and sweeping a series against that scrub
absolutely.
team.
I miss Pujols hitting the ball off that train out there, But yeah, I mean, it was just having that student with the flagpole out in center field and all that.
Yeah.
It was just kind of neat to see.
All right, let's move on to the. Actually, give me your division pick real quick, and then we'll move on to the AL East.
Okay. My division pick for this year is actually going to be Texas. And with an asterisk, if Texas can get Holland back early enough, then have enough pitching, then I think they'll be fine. If not, then I would have to say it'll probably be Oakland again.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with Oakland, and on paper, Texas has more talent. The pitching is where Oakland has the advantage. I'm just gonna go with Oakland. I don't, they just seem to do it year after year, so I'm not gonna pick against them yet. But I could easily see Texas winning this division too.
Okay, I'll go with Texas.
All right. The AL East. I guess let's start off with the Yankees. A lot of big free agency signings. I thought they were trying to stay under a certain salary cap. I guess that's all out the window now. They signed McCann. They signed Ellsbury. They signed Beltran, and of course they signed Masahiro Tanaka. We'll start off by talking about Tanaka. Just tell me what your expectations are for him.
I don't know. It's a lot like when Yu Darvish came into the league. I think that first year he had a good year, but it wasn't. He didn't blow the doors off like he did year two. And that might be something similar with Tanaka. I think there's going to be some element of transition. Now, of course, with Tanaka, and what was he? He was 24-0 last year, pitching over in Japan. So he might be ahead of the curve. The nice thing about it is that he's not going to have to be the man in New York. He's slotted in right now as the number 3 starter. But on the other side of that, there's a lot more pressure in New York than there is in Texas. So I think he'll be under a lot more scrutiny. I don't know. I've seen some mocks where he's going for $13, $14, $15. I don't know if I'd spend that much for him, but I think if you can get him for 10 or less, then he'd be worth taking a shot on.
Yeah, and I definitely think he's going to go for more than that, with the hype surrounding him. And I'd just rather take somebody for that same price that I know more of what I'm going to get because I've seen them pitch in the majors. So that's kind of the route I'm going to go. It seems like a lot of these moves that they made in the offseason, I don't know if you realize it, but they're all these left-handed bats. McCann, Beltran is a switch hitter, but he's going to, obviously hit from the left more than the right. And then you got Ellsbury. They even signed, I'm sorry, they didn't sign, but they get Teixeira back, another switch hitter. I think that was maybe part of the plan is to sign these left-handed bats because the right field is really area you can take advantage of in this ballpark, and it makes me interested in McCann and Beltran. I think that they could have a big home run total for each of them this year.
Yeah, you got that short porch out there in right field. You can even see a spike in Ellsbury's home run. He could come back up. I know he had that one year where he had 30 home runs or something like that.
32.
Yeah, and I don't know if he'll get back to that number, but you could definitely see him getting back closer to 20 or more. And that's just, we saw that with Johnny Damon when he played in New York. His home run numbers inflated a little bit, having that short porch out there. I'm not a Yankees guy. I'm not a huge fan of them at all, but I love what they've done. I think they've constructed a team that has every chance to go deep this year, and it's nice that they did that in Jeter's last year. So I think there's a lot to like about this lineup. I agree with what you said about Beltran and McCann, and I also like Teixeira for a big bounce back guy.
Really, because that's interesting. Because I think you can get to Sheriff for dirt cheap on draft day, and that's one of those picks.
Oh, you're gonna get Sheriff dirt cheap. But if he stays healthy, let's not forget what kind of player he was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes injuries make us ignorant to how talented people really are. Teixeira was a phenomenal player before he started battling those injuries. If he stays healthy, they've got him projected to be fourth in the lineup.
He's one of those guys that even if you don't really think he's going to bounce back, I mean, why not even take a chance on him for $2 at the end of a draft, considering what the upside is?
Absolutely. Or go early in the draft, grab him for $10.
All right, I got to ask you about Alfonso Soriano. Alfonso Soriano on Brandon's team. I mean, that was insane what he did last year. 18 steals even to go along with those great power numbers. Is there? What do you think he goes for on draft day? I don't think anybody is really buying into what he did, and I think he, I like him back in New York. I don't know why. I just feel like he's more hyped up to play in front of a team that matters.
Yeah, I think he's ready to get back and play in a stadium he likes to play in a town he likes to play in. Alfonso Soriano is a great talent. I don't know. I think he's going to be another one of those guys you're going to be able to get for cheaper, later on in the draft that could do well. You know what's crazy, and not to jump off subject real quick, but think about some of the guys that Brandon picked up throughout the season, in a streaming deal. He picked up Soriano. He picked up Pedro Alvarez. He picked up, who are we talking about, Masterson? Or was it something like that?
He did.
He made some good streams. I think he was just so far behind at the beginning.
Yeah, he dug a hole.
He ended up picking up some guys that just had monster seasons. Soriano had like a 2-month stretch where he was hitting like four or five home runs a week.
Yeah, and if you remember, I mean, last year was by far the closest that I've played in fantasy when you're talking about from like 9 to number 1 in terms of the games back that they were. Brandon's team, I really, Derek's team was great, so maybe I should say 9 to 2. I really don't think there was a drastic difference between Brandon's team and say Michael and Jordan's team at second. I think I wouldn't be surprised at all if they played each other last year and Brandon were to win. That wouldn't shock me at all. I mean, that's just how much competition we have in this league right now.
Yeah, it's a solid league, no doubt about it. But yeah, Soriano is going to be somebody you can get for cheap that I think anybody in this Yankee lineup, with the exception of maybe Brian Roberts, you would probably look at and say, they're worth getting for a couple dollars.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: end of the draft, you don't have a shortstop yet. You going to go Jeter?
I doubt it, but I do see it. I do.
He's going to hit 300. That's solid. He's going to hit 300, right?
I don't think he will. I don't know. Just a year off. I would be surprised if he can maintain that, but he could. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked, but I would probably go in another direction. But I'll
bet you Chinese buffet hits 300.
All right, I'll do that. 300? I mean, that's pretty high. Are you sure you want to go that high?
Yeah.
All right, bold move. I like it.
I believe in cheats, man. I think he'll hit 300. He may not do much else, but I think he'll hit 300.
All right, put it on the board.
There you go. It's on tape.
All right. Last question I'd like to ask you about with this team, CC Sabathia. First of all, I'm not one to really buy into all this best shape of my life story or whatever, but I think he's better than what he was last year, which was like a mid to high 4 ERA. I don't think he's sub 3 ERA anymore, but I think I'm looking at Sabathia and thinking I can get a guy that's going to pitch deep into games, maybe have a good chance to get a lot of wins, and get me a 3.70 ERA with maybe a 1.25 WHIP. Or do you think that's what Sabathia is? You think he's better or worse than that?
I don't know. Every year he's throwing a little bit softer, a little bit softer.
That's a great point.
What's he right now? High 80s, 88, something like that on his fastball.
That's a great point.
He's not as dominant as he once was, and I think a lot of that is because there's so much mileage on him. If you remember when he went to Milwaukee from Cleveland, remember they used the hell out of him. I don't know if you remember that or not. During that year they had that run. And I think what happens is over time is that just, an arm wears down, especially on bigger guys like that. I don't like Sabathia at all. I don't like him at all. He would have to be pretty darn cheap this year for me to consider him.
Well, I think he's projected to go for 4 or 5, which I don't think I would do that. I would probably take him for 2 or 3 though.
Would you? What about Michael Pineda? That was the guy that came over last year from Seattle with a lot of hype. Of course, he's had a lot of injuries. So far, he's looked pretty good this spring.
He has, and I actually owned him his rookie year, and he started off amazingly hot. He kind of cooled down in the second half. I don't, I know everybody's heard me say this. I just don't really care to draft guys in the AL East. It's just a tough division, all hitter parks pretty much. I like Pineda's skill set, and I'd take him for $1, I guess, at the end of a draft, and I think he could maybe do that. I think you could probably get him for $1. But I don't know. There's a lot of pitchers I like, so I wouldn't even. I'm not 100% sure I would even take him.
Okay.
Do you like Pineda?
You know what? He's all right. I haven't really decided yet. I just wanted to get your thoughts on him because I saw he was having a real good spring, and of course he was one of those guys that had a lot of hype surrounding him coming to New York. It's just hard to say, but you're absolutely right. That was a brutal division to pitch in. I'm not big on owning guys from the AL East. Just not, especially not pitchers.
Let me ask you: have you ever seen Pineda pitch before?
Yeah.
He is massive. He's like 6'9", 260, and he looks like he's got a frame that could carry about 310. I mean, he is massive.
He's a big guy, but like I said, that's still not. Just knowing that your pitcher is going to pitch in places like Toronto and Fenway, I don't like. I don't like anything to do with it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the Boston Red Sox, defending World Series champions. They.
And I look at this lineup and I'm like, how the hell did they win the World Series?
I know.
What I mean?
Yeah.
I just don't get it.
I have to be honest. I did not even think this team had a shot at making the playoffs at the beginning of the year. I love their manager, John Farrell. And they had a lot of guys that kind of bought into the underdog role. Victorino, he really stepped up and played well. Big move, though. Ellsbury's gone. That's a huge, huge loss. Is this even a playoff team for you this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, it probably is. They'll contend because they're well managed. They've got guys that play hard. They have good leadership on their team. Pedroia and Ortiz are great leaders. It's a big loss losing Ellsbury because now you're looking at slotting in probably Victorino in the leadoff spot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's a true leadoff hitter. I think he's more of a number 2 hitter. But of course you don't. It's the American League. It's not real baseball, so you don't have the small ball. You know what I mean? You get to just kind of like, hey, everybody hits. And there's just not a lot of strategy to it. So I guess you can put a guy like Victorino in the leadoff spot and be fine.
Yeah, I had Victorino last year. He was great for me down the stretch. I think something that was interesting is that he was having some pain in his rib area when he was switch hitting, when he's batting from the left side, so he ditched it. He decided to only hit from the right side, which has got to be the first time he's done that since he's been playing in the majors. And he really hit the ball well. He hit over 300 after he made the switch to just bat right-handed. There's talks that he's maybe going to go to that strategy again this year. And he hit for a lot more power, and he got on base a lot more. He crowds the plate more than anybody I've ever seen as a right-handed hitter. I mean, he almost steps on top of the plate. When somebody will throw it directly down the middle of the plate, it looks like they're painting the inside corner just based on where he's standing. But I think Victorino's one of those guys. Maybe it's because I had him last year, but I think he could go for a value.
Oh, Victorino's solid. He's definitely the kind of player you want in your fantasy lineup because he's just a steady, solid contributor. You know what I mean? And he pretty much shows up every night. He plays hard. So you know that you're going to get something from him, whether it's a couple of hits or a run or an RBI. You're going to get something out of him. So, yeah, absolutely, I agree with you. He's a solid kid, I think.
All right, let me ask you this. Is Dustin Pedroia going to be the most expensive player on Michael's team this year?
Michael will not own Dustin Pedroia this year.
Whoa, is that coming from you? You're thinking is he a lock to be on your team?
What's that?
You're making a big play on Pedroia, huh?
No, I'm not making a big play on Pedroia. I just don't think Michael will own him this year.
He's owned him every year we've played, and I was hoping that you were going to say that you were very interested in Pedroia and he'd be on your team. Maybe one less bidder for Carpenter at second base.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not going to show my hand here, but, no, I mean, Laser shows he's a great player. He plays hard. He epitomizes everything you want out of a baseball player.
Yeah.
But, when I think of him, I don't know if he's worth what he generally costs to get.
Which one of these three pitchers are you most interested in drafting between Lester, Lackey, and Clay Buchholz? And I'll throw in PV as well.
Man, I don't know, none. I guess.
Yeah.
I could probably name 2 or 3 stars from the Yankees lineup I take before for these three guys.
Yeah. They've been
But,
so
you know,
inconsistent.
I'd probably have to go with their ace. I'd probably go with Lester. Buckles, too much with an injury risk. Lackey, yeah, he came back late last year and did a great job. I'd probably have to go with the one that's tried and true, and that's John Lester.
All right, last guy I want to ask you about on this team, it's got to be Xander Bogaerts, rookie that came up last year. He's going to be shortstop eligible, play a little third base, possibly if Middlebrooks is out of the lineup. I like Bogaerts' skill set. I don't think it really translates as much to being a great fantasy player, but I do think he's a little bit interesting because the lineup is he's gonna have guys on base in front of him and Victorino and Ortiz and Pedroia, so I think he could have an opportunity to drive in some runs at shortstop. But I don't know if he runs enough to be a great fantasy player yet.
No, you're 100% right. It doesn't translate well. I think he's going to be a very good player for the Red Sox. Maybe not from a fantasy standpoint, but I think he's going to be a great contributor, especially when you talk about the shortstop position. There's a lot of hype around him, too. A lot of the mocks I'm doing, I'm seeing him getting drafted. But I think that's people just drinking the Kool-Aid. I don't think he's somebody that you really want to own on your team.
I see going for more than $1 or $2. I haven't really noticed.
There's been drafts I've done where you'll go for like $4 only because somebody nominates him with the dollar.
Yeah.
And somebody wants to be a dick and make sure he doesn't get him,
Yeah.
Other than that, no, I mean, he's less than $5 every time.
All right. Are you ready to switch on to another team?
Yeah, let's move on.
All right. Baltimore Orioles, another team that's made some moves here in the offseason. They've signed Ubaldo Jimenez, Nelson Cruz. I got to tell you, I really like this offensive lineup.
I just want to say I freaking love the Orioles, and I think I've loved them my whole life, probably because I always really liked Cal Ripken when I was a kid. I like their uniforms, I like their ballpark. I've always just, anytime they're good, I'm excited. You know what I mean? And you're right, this lineup is fantastic. There's 3 or 4 guys on this team I look at, and I'm like, I can definitely see myself owning them at some point this year, or at least making a run at them on draft day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The guy I want to start with on that is Adam Jones.
He's been a guy that has had a lot of talent, and he seemed to kind of underachieve until these last 2 years, where he has just been solid as can be, very consistent week to week. Sign him up for 30 and 100 with a solid average and get you 15 steals as well. So I think he's one of the safer players in this entire draft.
He is. He does have a high strikeout rate, which I guess is more of a concern in real life since we don't count strikeouts in our offensive makeup in this league.
Mm-hmm.
But he does have a high strikeout rate. But you're right. I mean, it's 30 and 100. He'll get you some steals. Just a really solid all-around player.
Yeah, and you're talking about a guy that could. I think he finished in the top 10 last year, and he's one of those players that you a lot of times you hope to get you'd hope with your top 20 or so picks that you're going to get a guy that's going to finish in the top 20. But you're really not sure on guys like Tulo and Hanley. But I think you can really take Adam Jones with a lot of confidence, which is something to be valued, considering that he's going to probably go for under $40.
He's probably top 5 when you talk about drafting with confidence. I think you're absolutely right.
All right, let's move over to left field. Nelson Cruz, I think this is a great spot for him to land in Baltimore. He's probably going to be your DH. Maybe he'll play some left field, but I think he's going to be inserted right there around the number 5 spot in the order and driving a lot of runs with guys like Jones and Markakis and Machado and Davis hitting in front of him.
Yeah, in real life, any situation that requires Nelson Cruz to put on a glove, you don't want. But for fantasy purposes, I do like him.
Oh yeah, you got to Nelson Cruz. You got to give him about 30% of that St. Louis Cardinals title in 11, where David Freese hit that ball over his head in right field.
I'd give him more than that. I'd probably give him 40 and give David Freese 60.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but you're right. He moves from one great hitting lineup to another. I think he's really going to benefit from it, especially moving, like you said, to these hitters' marks in the AL East. I think that he's going to have some good numbers.
All right, I got to ask you, Chris Davis. He's projected to go as a top 7 or 8 pick right now, and he's one of these guys. I think the comparison that I make to him is Jose Bautista. Obviously, Davis had a higher pedigree, but he never put it together. But right now, I mean, there's nobody that you expect to hit more home runs for except for maybe Bautista. I think those are your top 2. Bautista, his first year came out of nowhere, and so I really didn't know what to expect. So for me, I wanted to watch and see what he did in spring training, and he just mashed the ball again in spring training, and he's proven to be the player, close to the player that he was that first breakout season. Chris Davis is doing a similar thing right now. He's already hit 2 or 3 home runs. He's hitting close to 500. Obviously not the same competition he's going to face in the major leagues, but Chris Davis right now, he looks like he's more of last year than a fluke. Do you think he falls into a guy that's going to hit closer to 50 home runs or closer to 30?
You know what? And he's always been a power hitter. I mean, and that's always been kind of the thing about him. Is he's a dead red power hitter, and honestly, there's not a ton of those guys left in baseball anymore.
Yeah.
The guys that are just flat out, home run or nothing. And I think he's probably closer to 30. I think he's probably a 35 to 37 home run guy, as opposed to a 50 home run guy. And that's just because the first half of last year was just ridiculous. That's hard to repeat at that pace, especially with the way baseball is now. But still, you talk about he'll end up with probably more home runs than Prince Fielder. I don't know if he'll end up with more than Goldschmidt, but I think he'll be probably at the end of the year when it all settles, probably the number 2 first baseman again.
All right, and let me ask you about your boy Manny Machado. I don't quite know if he's going to be ready for opening day, but if he's not, or even the way that things are going right now, he's kind of a high risk, high reward pick. I actually think you could get him for a really good price. Maybe it's just a low risk, high reward pick because he's got a great pedigree and he hit for a great average. He's going to score a lot of runs in this lineup. Maybe the power is still developing as well. So you tell me about Machado. I mean, you know him better than any of us do.
Yeah, like we're friends from back in the day.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, when Machado first came up, it was like this, the next A-Rod type thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where there was just all this hype surrounding him, and what he's turned out to be is a much better real-life player than he is fantasy player, because he's phenomenal, defensively. But at the same time, he was on track to set the Major League record for doubles last year.
Yeah.
At one point, and obviously he didn't get there, but at some point you have to wonder, is that really what he is, or are those doubles going to eventually start turning into home runs as his power continues to grow? So I like Machado a lot. I think if you get good power at other places in your lineup, then he's certainly somebody you'd want to take and feel good about sticking at third base.
Now, do we know if he's going to be ready for the start of the season or not yet, or does it look like he's on track to be?
I haven't heard it. All signs indicate that he will be ready. If he's not ready for opening day, it looks like he'll be ready within that first month.
Okay, so fairly early, if nothing else. The problem with the Orioles has got to be the rotation. It's not particularly great. I mean, they've got some serviceable guys: Bud Norris, Miguel Gonzalez, Wei Yin Chen. I mean, these guys are decent. They're not horrible, but they're not great either. They did sign Ubaldo Jimenez, but to be honest, I'm not interested in any of these 5 guys.
Yeah, no, I'm not too excited about their pitching staff. Maybe Stillman, if I can get him for real cheap, because I think he's somebody who's still kind of growing and coming along there.
He would be the one guy that I don't mention out of the rotation, and he's the one that you pick.
Yeah, well, and I had Chen 2 years ago, and he did all right, but last year was really kind of a rough year for him.
Yeah, it was. He does have some upside. I mean, he was pretty solid on Big Ben's team last year. I mean, he's one of those guys that's got more upside than most of these other guys at their point of their career. Jimenez had that potential, but his velocity's dropped off some, and he just doesn't have the control, I don't think, to maintain a great season all the way throughout the end of the year.
I agree.
All right, let's move on to the Tampa Bay Rays. The Rays, this is a great division. A lot of teams think that the Rays might be the class of the division. I don't think I'm going to agree with that, but we'll make our pick at the end of the show. What stands out to you about this Rays team? I mean, is it the pitching? Is it the hitting? What do you like about this team?
It's their manager.
I love Madden.
That sounds sad to say, but I think they've got the best manager in the AL East.
Yeah.
I think Joe Madden is just fantastic, and what he's done with kind of the money limitations and just been able to keep that team competitive is amazing. For fantasy purposes, obviously where I'm going to start and kind of get your thoughts is asking about Will Myers.
I love Will Myers. I do. I think he's got 30 home runs hitting this year, and I think he could swipe 15 to 20 bags. I don't think he's a solid bet for batting average, but I love Will Myers.
Yeah, that was one of those deals where, I think the Tampa Bay Rays came out, looking great, giving up James Shields for Will Myers. Because Will Myers is somebody you can keep for cheap. You probably got him for a few years before he even hits arbitration. And then, you got a couple years after that where if you get him signed to a cheap contract to avoid arbitration, you can get him low. And I think he's going to be probably the anchor of that lineup for many years.
Yeah, with him and Jennings in the outfield, you got two young guys that you could build around for as long until they hit free agency, I guess. Desmond Jennings is a player that really had a lot of hype surrounding him, and he has not lived up to it yet, but he does have – you can see glimpses of it. He's got a decent power stroke, maybe can hit 20 home runs in a perfect season, but he has a lot of speed.
He's been steady and solid. I don't want to compete with Brandon and try to draft him. I know how much Brandon loves Desmond Jennings. But, man, he's definitely serviceable. He's not one of those guys kind of like, we were talking about earlier, where if you need that third outfielder, you can do that utility spot. You can put him in there and feel pretty good about it.
Now, let me ask you about Evan Longoria. Every single year, it seems like Longoria is projected to be a first-round pick. This year, he's not. And I think for the first time, I'm not meaning to bash on Longoria, but I feel like he's finally rated appropriately, which is probably an early third-round pick, maybe a guy that's going to go for close to $30 at third base. I think that's about right. He's going to get you power. He's going to get you runs in RBI, but he's not running anymore, and his average has just not been there the last few years. But I'm not saying that I'm out on Longoria, but I think he's finally at an appropriate value where I might be willing to take him.
No, he's definitely in a tier all on his own, because he's not up in the Beltray tier, but he's not down in the Zimmerman tier. So he's kind of right there. And if he can stay healthy, then I like his power numbers. He's always been a player that I've just generally liked. You know what I mean? I just like Longoria. But I don't know if I'd go 30 for him. I think that if people get lazy on draft day and he ends up in the mid-20s, then I think that that's somebody that I would definitely be interested in.
All right, a lot of people were really hyped up on this rotation. David Price, Matt Moore, Alex Cobb, Chris Archer, and Jake Odorizzi. David Price really struggled at the beginning of last year. Then he hit the DL, kind of was slow to come back to form. And the thing that really worries me about Price is that his strikeout rate went down last year. It was under 8 strikeouts per 9. Obviously, he's a great control pitcher, but as far as me trying to get an ace pitcher, and I'm probably going to be focused on taking one and then building the rest of my team around lower dollar guys, I don't think Price is the one that I'd want to build it around.
Yeah, it's hard to say, because I think you're going to get him at a pretty good price this year. What I mean by that is you're probably going to get him for around the $20 to $22 range, in my opinion. Where in the past I think he was going to get up closer to $30. So I think you probably get him for a steal. I think that he's going to have a nice bounce back year. The player I like in this rotation the most is probably Alex Cobb, a guy that I drafted last year and then of course traded away, as I usually do. But I think that he's poised to eventually take over that ace role, because I don't think Price will be in a Rays uniform by the end of the year.
Now, you mentioned that trade, and let me just ask you this. And I hope that you're not too swayed by the league, but is there a chance that you're a little bit more conservative with your trading habits this year?
I don't know. It's hard to say. And maybe that's what's happened. Historically, in baseball, I have not been one to trade, at least not for the first 2-3 months or more in the season, because, baseball over time is a game of averages. And, but in this league, I've been pretty quick to trade, but I'm also not incredibly patient, because I also understand that players go through, you want to get your hot hands while they have them. So, I don't know. It's hard to say. There's a trade that seems to make sense for me, that I'm going to go ahead and make it. Okay. Whether it's Alex Cobb or Mike Trout.
That's cool. I was hoping you didn't pull a Big Ben and become so afraid to trade after people were making fun of your quick trigger. I mean, you didn't make a bunch of bad trades or anything. I mean, we joke about the Trout trade, but you got a lot of value back in that trade. It's not like it was a trade that ruined your season or anything like that at all. So
I was able to turn that into Alex Rios, Max Scherzer, and David Ortiz.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty solid.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I thought that was pretty solid, and I sat atop the standings for most of last summer, like I did the summer before. But for some reason, once September comes, my team loves to play him out. So
you mentioned Alex Cobb. I like Alex Cobb as well. I think he's probably the guy I can see myself drafting the most out of any of the guys in this rotation. But what do you think about Matt Moore? He's a guy that's had really as much hype as anybody other than Strasburg in terms of a pitcher coming up through the system and being promoted, but he hasn't really lived up to it yet. But you've seen those glimpses. You can see the high strikeout totals. Do you think he can put it all together this year, or is he somebody you're staying away from?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, you're right. There's a lot of hype coming in, but he really hasn't excited me that much. You know what I mean? Just from what I've seen so far. It depends. As you get into the flow of the draft, depending on what you need and as he comes for bid, kind of the trajectory he's moving. If he's moving up into the team height, then I don't think you want to go there. But if he stays low, then I think he's worth taking a flyer.
All right. Well, I'm ready to move on to the final team of the preview if you are. All right, the Toronto Blue Jays, a team that had a lot of hype coming into last year after all the trades that they had made. This year they were coming in at least healthy. That's really what their problem has been, is they haven't had these guys in the lineup for a full season. So to start the year, you got Reyes back and you got Batista back. The Josh Johnson ordeal, that experiment is come and gone. I have to say that I am always tempted by Reyes at top of that Blue Jays lineup with Batista and Encarnacion hitting behind him. Tell me why I shouldn't be doing this, because I just know that I'm going to come away drafting him and he's going to get injured and I'll be disappointed again.
That's exactly what's going to happen. I mean, he's a year older, and he's just showing signs of breaking down. And it's funny because I think Reyes is only 30 years old.
Yeah, he's around 30.
But it feels like he's been in the league forever. It feels like he should be 40 by now. And I just wonder maybe if all those games are really starting to take a toll. I just don't look at him for as much as he's going to cost to get. I just don't think he's durable enough.
All right, let me ask about your favorite player in the major leagues. It's got to be Colby Rasmus in center field. Another guy with a lot of hype.
You know what I mean? I don't know. You want to talk about a guy? To me, he's just like J.D. Drew. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a poor man's J.D. Drew.
Never going to live up to his potential.
Yeah, I'm done. That ship has sailed, in my opinion. But you do see the power at times where he'll have a 5-home run week out of nowhere. Left field, Melky Cabrera back from the PEDs, back from the injury. I mean, when he's in the lineup, he's normally hit for a solid average and been able to score some runs. He doesn't do a whole lot else than that. But I think as far as a run scorer and a high average guy, I think you can pencil him in as maybe your second utility guy and feel decent about it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. He's one of those guys that's going to get you, one or two categories, maybe three. You know what I mean? He might continue to get you some steals, but mostly when I look at him, I see average and runs. Mm-hmm. Okay, but he's serviceable, and probably somebody you're going to get for pretty cheap. So I don't think he's going to be on a lot of guys' radars this year.
All right, one of Drew's favorite players that he held on to last year, hoping that he would improve on what he scored, like 50 or 60 runs, something. He had a horrible year. A classic Drew player, Brett Lowry, you named it. So this guy has been. I had him 2 years ago when he got called up, and there was not many players better than him for that short stint up in the majors. So I think he was up for a couple months or so, but he was just flat out dominant, and he was a 5-category stud: home runs, steals. He had the average. He had it all. So you see the tools there. But I have to be honest, at just 24 years old, I feel like I'm already kind of off the bandwagon and already losing hope that he's going to be able to figure out what he was so successful doing a couple years ago.
Yeah, I mean, he's still really young, and I think there's going to be a lot of tempered expectations this year. He's still getting a decent amount of buzz on the mock draft.
Yeah, that's what I was surprised by. I was surprised that he's still projected to go for $8 to $10 or somewhere around there. I thought it'd be lower, maybe $5 or under.
No, that's exactly where I'm seeing him. It's anywhere from $8 to $10. And I don't know. I mean, you talk about, and I don't know what his eligibilities are. I haven't looked.
He's at second. He's at second base too.
Okay, so that might make him a bit more attractive. That might be something where if you end up with waiting until late on a second baseman, then he might be a guy you get for $7-8. But you have to ask yourself, if you're looking at it, you know what Brett Lawrie's history is, and you've got him and Jose Altuve looking you in the face. Who are you going to take?
Yeah.
I think I'd be more likely to go with the guy who's been insurance dead.
All right, and any pitchers you're interested in with this rotation at all? And really, the only two worth mentioning are R.A. Dickey and Brandon Morrow.
I'm not. No.
Yeah, I'm not.
Maybe Jansen the closer, but other than no, I'm not interested in any of them.
Yeah, I'm not
so,
either.
And that's Casey Jansen, not Kenley Jansen, right?
Yeah, that is Casey Jansen. All right, now let me ask you this.
So who do you like to win the AL East, right?
The AL East, this might be a little bit of surprise, and the two teams that I was really going back and forth were actually not the Red Sox or the Rays. It was the Orioles and the Yankees. I'm going to go with the Orioles.
Okay, and then I'm actually going to go with the Yankees.
All right, and actually, so you've got your three teams. Who are your division winners?
The Tigers, the Yankees, and the Rangers.
Okay, and I've got the Tigers, the A's, and the Orioles. So we each have two wild card picks. You give one, I'll give one, then we'll switch back and forth till we're done.
All right, I'm going to go with my first wild card is the Oakland Athletics.
All right, and I will say that my first is going to be the Yankees. I think that they are a very strong team. I just like the roster a lot this year.
Okay, my second wild card is going to be the Tampa Bay Rays, though I think that the Royals will be there at the end.
You think so? Do you think the Royals will pull it out, have a chance to win 90 games this year?
Quite possibly. It depends on what the Indians do. If the Indians overachieve again, then that's going to cause some problems. But if not, then the Indians suffer this year, then they get to play the Indians, White Sox, and Twins a lot, which is nice.
All right, I'm going to go with the Rangers for my second pick. So basically, what I'm saying, and it's so weird to say this because the teams have so much talent and they've just been around. You expect them on paper to be a great team. No Angels, no Red Sox, and no Rays. So those are three teams that, and I didn't even mention the Indians and the Royals. So the American League is pretty good all the way throughout.
Yeah, it's a pretty good division, especially the East and the West. The Central is a little weak, but there's also a team or two in there that's really, really good.
Yeah. All right. Any closing thoughts you have? Anything you want to talk about for draft day coming up on Saturday?
No, man. I'll tell you what. It's Sunday night, so we've got less than a week to go. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to having everybody over at the house. It should be a good time. So there'll be plenty of good food and beer and all that good stuff. So it'll be fun.
All right. Now, I just want to give you one last thought to think about before we sign off. I know that you're trying to be smart about it with your draft, but Max Scherzer, you got to think about this. You cannot have an entire season of Max Scherzer on another team, can you? You really got to do whatever it takes, honestly.
No, man, I can accept it. I can accept it because everybody has their limit, and every player has their limit, even Mike Trout. I think that you have to reach a point where you're like, okay, I'm not going to go any further.
Yeah. All right. Well, fair enough. I don't know if I really believe it, but we got you on record. We'll play it back the final minute of this podcast after the draft is over and see what happens.
You got 6 days to find out.
All right, man. Well, I'm really excited. I guess I will talk to you in a couple days, and we need to get a group text started or something just to see what we need to do with food, or I'd like to help pitch in with at least. I know this. If your wife's going to make a bunch of food, I'd like to at least pitch out for some money to help pay for all that stuff or the time, and so
okay, well,
we'll figure all that out.
You guys figure that out, and I hope that you guys work on that. But it is what it is. I agreed to host, so if you just want to come and have a good time, feel free to do so.
All right, man. Well, thanks for doing this, and it looks like we went about a minute longer than last time, so much for cutting this one a little bit shorter.
Sounds good.
All right, now I'll talk to you later.
At least Eric will listen to it. All right, man.
All right, see ya.